Let's return just a little bit back to the human and back to evolution. The title of this talk is Harnessing Evolution, and some of the Twitter conversation leading up to this event, some people were outraged by the idea that you wanted to harness evolution. I mean, that's just the nature of Twitter. They were seeing what they wanted to see. But if we were to harness human evolution for the betterment of us as individuals, which sounds slightly problematic, in what ways could we do it? Should we take a massive, high-risk approach to our own human biology to ensure our survival in the future? Because it feels like we're already taking that massive risk with our own human biology, and it's with the environments through which we bring children up. So it's not even the educational environment, it's the fact that half of the children in the US don't have the immune systems to survive the present we're living in because of the two most scariest words in advertising, which are Dettol protects. When you grow kids up in environments where 99.9% of germs are removed, they don't develop their own immune system, and they lean on the economics of the American drug system to generate their immune systems. Do you think we are in a post-Darwinist age where essentially we are hurting ourselves? We are not evolving for a betterment of humanity. We're homogenizing the human to the extent that we're going to be reliant on technology to ensure our survival.
Well, we're doing a lot of things. We are ignoring the fact that we remain evolutionary creatures operating an evolutionary program that we haven't fully elucidated, so we don't even know what parts of it to be afraid of. At the same time, we're throwing huge amounts of novelty at our systems, which they are incapable of properly processing. So we're unhealthy physiologically, psychologically, and socially because we're living in an environment that we're not built for. So we're doing all of those things. And from the point of view of, I was a little surprised that saying that we should harness evolution or it will harness us caused people, I think, to hear, echoes of eugenics or something, which is really not what I intended to imply at all. In fact, genes were nowhere on my mind when I wrote that phrase. What I was really talking about is properly understanding the importance of the cultural side of our evolutionary program and harnessing mechanisms that are capable of leveling us up. In other words, instead of haphazardly discovering what works, basically through a cultural Darwinian mechanism that involves a huge amount of carnage, that we could intentionally use things like markets and analogs of markets to increase the capacity of our minds to address the problems that we face. Whether we should do that in the service of evolution, it seems to me crystal clear that we mustn't. That this is the moment at which we have to take evolution out of the driver's seat, because this is probably going to sound wrong to most folks, but we actually know what our purpose is. Our purpose is the exact same purpose as every other creature that has evolved on this planet, and presumably any other that hasn't gone through such a transition. Your purpose is the same purpose as a spruce tree, a squid, a malaria particle. They all have the identical purpose, which means it's not a very interesting one. So what we should do is recognize that that purpose has resulted in an amazing machine, that what we are capable of is very special stuff, and what it is in service of is not special at all. So it is time for us to look at the purpose that we were handed and say, you know what? Not good enough. We are human beings, and we are capable of a purpose worthy of the amazing machinery we've been handed, and we can write our own purpose. I don't want to pretend that that's easier than it actually is. There's one bitter pill that comes along with it, which is if you're going to write your own purpose, you have to do it in a way that it is game theoretically immune to challenge from other individuals that don't accept a new purpose. In other words, we're humans serious about rewriting their purpose and making the purpose of humanity worthy of what we are. It has to be what's called an evolutionarily stable strategy, which means a strategy that can endure competition from any other strategy that you might introduce.
That's not possible, is it? That's not possible. By the nature of just being human beings, that is not possible.
I believe it is possible.
In what way? So some of the people who are trying to harness evolution are groups like transhumanists who believe that we're going to take the technological frontier and we're going to ignore the geographical frontier, the transfer frontier. We're going to take the technological frontier and we're going to run with that one. We're going to cryogenically freeze our bodies, upload our minds so that we can propagate as quickly as memes propagate. I mean, where do you stand on these sorts of individuals who believe that is the potential new purpose for human beings?
There's interesting stuff there, but I think it's largely nonsense. That in some sense, if the uploading your mind business is a little bit of a reinvention of the teleporter problem, right? The teleporter is kind of a cool idea. You step into the teleporter and you disintegrate here and you're reassembled over there. But if the teleporter didn't work and you were reassembled over there and you still existed over here, would you volunteer to step in to the teleporter to be disintegrated so that the one that was on the other end could then go on and continue to live your life? No, you probably wouldn't. So likewise, if suddenly tomorrow somebody announces that we could, credibly upload your mind to the cloud, and the only thing is that you have to agree to have your physical manifestation destroyed, after we've done the uploading, you're not going to be too thrilled with that either. So anyway, I would say the transhumanist stuff, transhumanism is a label. I do believe we have to essentially transcend what we've been to this point. So maybe you could argue this is some version of transhumanism, but all of the versions of transhumanism that I've heard are, they're cornucopian in their own way. And I don't think I have yet to hear one that is a satisfying picture of some future. So I'm not arguing that rewriting our purpose will be easy and doing it in a way. I know if we don't do it in a way that is evolutionarily stable, that it's more or less pointless, that we might stave off a problem for a generation or two, but that we would be returned to exactly the puzzle we're in now by evolutionary forces. So I think it has to be done carefully. And, what's more, you have to do it in a way that avoids the other pitfall, which is the dystopian scenarios that follow any sort of utopian plan. So we haven't talked about this yet, but I have argued in several places that utopia is probably the worst idea human beings ever had. And so if you hear me as a utopian, you're not hearing me right yet. We need to do this in a non-utopian way if it's to function at all. And we have to be very sensitive to doing it in a way that reveals if we are headed towards a dystopian outcome that we didn't anticipate. We have to see that coming so that we can save ourselves from that too.
Let's talk about less of the technologies that will help us create this human purpose or this generalized purpose, and talk more about the processes, and very specifically the political processes that may allow this to occur, because you've been a massive advocate of kind of confronting the distinction between the political left and the political right. You think that that's not very useful when it comes to having these sorts of discussions.
Yeah, it's really quite useless. And what's more, I mean, the way I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to solve the world's problems through the political apparatus that we have. And basically, they all came to naught. And I began to wonder why that was, why there was no plausible route out of our predicament. And what I came to realize was that actually nobody on the left or the right has a clue policy-wise what we're supposed to do. All of the things that are advocated on both sides are so feeble relative to the puzzles that they ostensibly are targeted at, that really we are at a point where we have to admit that the toolkit we've been playing with just it's not powerful enough to deal with what we're up against. Now, that's bad on the one hand because it means we don't have the tools yet. But it's good in another way because it means that when you sit down with somebody who is, if you're on the left and you're sitting down with people on the right or vice versa, acknowledging that none of us have the right answers in terms of what we're supposed to do actually allows a whole different conversation to unfold where we talk about what unites us. And there's I think, a surprising amount that does unite people on the political left and the political right, and is the basis of a new conversation. And really, people are generally, whether left or right, agreed that structural biases against certain people are bad, right? That it would be a desirable thing if we had a world in which there was no structural bias that came from who you were born as. And, there would then be inequality based on what you did with what you were handed, but that basically fairness is desirable. What we differ over is how likely we are, how unfair things are in the present, and how likely we are to be able to make them more fair without doing damage. Left and right are divided over that. But as soon as you put the policy question aside and you say, let's first just agree on what we would like the world to look like, the basis for a fertile discussion is there. And that discussion isn't happening. We're too divided over policy. But I would suggest recognizing the failure of our whole landscape of policy proposals so that you can move forward from values. And then the question is, all right, if these are our values, if these are the things that we want to see, what are the policies that actually might lead us there? And I suspect the policy, the level of change necessary at a policy level is great, that we need to actually architect systems that nobody's envisioned yet, but that doing so is plausible, and that we could realize the values that unite us at a much higher level than our present system does.
So do you think the issue is the policies are generated to get, to a degree, to affect change, but also to get elected? Again, it's back to the short-termism and long-termism and how those two things basically do not interplay. So you very rarely hear the values of most left or right politicians because they're so fragmented by social media biases anyway, but the policies are even harder to grasp because they have to speak specifically to you, who's going to be the voting electorate. Do you think there needs to be something maybe even outside of politics where science can maybe lead a new progressive way in which we think and operate in the world?
So I think what you've said is quite accurate, that there's something about the political dynamic that is inherently unpatriotic. And I don't necessarily mean patriotism with respect to any particular nation, but unpatriotic relative to the values that should unite us. So because politics has to be self-perpetuating, because you have to get the votes in order to wield the power, it does cause policy to be warped into a vote-generating scheme rather than a values realization mechanism. So the question really is, in light of the jeopardy that we face together, is there not a patriotic politics? And, it's a little bit before my time, actually, but there was a tradition of the loyal opposition. The idea that just because somebody disagreed with you on policy didn't mean that they were your antagonist, right? You were in a real disagreement over the way to accomplish shared goals. And so we need to find our way back to that modality where we don't suspect everybody who disagrees with us of some kind of deep moral failing, because in general, that's not what's going on. In general, we're proceeding from such a different set of priors that we reach a different conclusion that sounds like subterfuge of some kind. But if you started with their priors, you'd find out why